from Bank Islam, Dr. Afzan Nizam, who will be talking. Both of them so happen to be coming from the finance background. We have two other speakers that had to decline last minute. So I will be talking to you about the demography and give you a brief overview of population aging in Malaysia. Yeah? So my name is Teguh Aizan. I just finished a 1-hour keynote at Institute Social Malaysia in KL. So I just got in. Yeah? So I'll share with you some data before I call on the speakers to talk about their topics. Okay? Let's look at population aging trends in Perak, issues and opportunities. And I'm not focusing just on Perak, but I'll give you an overview of the whole Malaysian population and the Perak statistics. Next, please. Okay, I'll talk about the transition in Perak, some socio-demographic characteristics, some issues, challenges, and opportunities, and the way forward. Since originally there was 4 speakers, so we had to divide our time about 10 minutes each. So we will do the same justice for that. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. If you look at the population aging as an overview, there is an increasing number and proportion of older person, be it age 60 or age 65, because Malaysia uses age 60 as the cut-off age for aging. And the UN system and WHO and ILO uses age 65 as the cut-off age for aging. And in the demographic transition in Perak, I'll share with you the state and district levels transition and relative to other states, okay? Okay, if you look at why aging happens, it is because of two basic demographic processes, i.e. fertility and mortality level, and at the same time the issue of migration, which I didn't write inside here about migration. But if you look at the total fertility rate for Malaysia in 2015, it is 2.0, meaning that if in a family you have 2 persons, husband and wife, and you have two child, that means there's 0 replacement rate, 0 growth, okay? And if you look at the fertility rate among the races, Malay is 2.6, Chinese is 1.4, Indian is 1.4, meaning that Chinese and Indian has negative growth in that sense, yeah, because there's only 1 child per family, okay? And in Perak, the fertility rate is 2.1 in 2015, meaning that they achieved replacement rate in Perak in 2015. And these are the Perak state comparatively. Perak and highlighter mana satu? Never mind. But this is a comparison of the Perak and Malaysian data. Yeah? And another aspect of aging is that our population are living longer. And just looking at the population at age 60 between Perak and Malaysia, life expectancy in 2000 for Malaysia, male 70, female 74. And if you look at 2015, it is 72 and 77. And for Perak, you see that you have 18 more years to live when you are reaching age 60. So meaning that, are you prepared to live the added years after retirement? Okay. What kind of resources do you have? And how is your health resource? Things like that, okay? Okay, this is a comparison projection data from age 60 and above by state. And this is a 210 states looking at the spatial distribution. Looking at the spatial distribution where Perak is in comparison to other states in Peninsular Malaysia. If you look at the color shows that Perak state in 210 is already having between 6 to 7% of older population. The next is Putrajaya and Negeri Sembilan. That's the next state. Penang and Perlis at the top. And if you look at, and if you look at 2040, many of the states in Peninsular Malaysia is already aged state. Okay? And Sarawak will be an aged state. And Pahang in the middle and Sabah is still comparatively a young state. Okay? So meaning that more than 40% of the population will be 60 years and over. And another factor that I want to share with you is that in relation to aging, you can also look at the GDP by state. Meaning that in relationship to the population, you look at the availability of resources of the state in order for the state to plan for services for all its population, but also including the older person. So if you look at this then, for Malaysia in 2010, we are about 8% of the big circle is Malaysia. Tak nampak dia punya highlighter. Highlight. Anyway, but you know, and you look at Perak above there, 12%. But if you look at the bottom, in terms of GDP per capita at current prices in Malaysian ringgit, Perak is in between 10,000 to 20,000. But Perak is at the top in terms of population size. Okay? And KL is in the middle, but it's low in terms of population, but it's quote-unquote a rich state by the GDP per capita. Yeah? Oops. And if you look at the 2015 data, Perak is really at the top, where it's close to 14% of the population are 60 years and over. So actually Perak is an aged state. Yeah, it's a orang tua punya state. Okay, but still the GDP hasn't moved much. So meaning that maybe looking at the resources, availability of resources to plan for services, they might be competing with other population and things like that. So it's just showing that the relationship between population size and GDP. Okay. But it doesn't mean that this is the priority. It means that when in the thinking process, you need to look at how government has to think about reallocating resources based on the different needs of the population. And one of the needs of the population is the aged population needs. Yeah? Okay, and this is the population of Perak by district using the 2000 and 210 census. Or if you look at the 210 census, Manjung is the only district that is quote-unquote quite young compared to the other states. Because if you look at, if you use 15% of the population aged 60 and above as a cut-off age, meaning that the oldest population is in the district of Kuala Kangsar, because it's now close to, in 2010, is close to 15%. Yeah? Yeah? And the other state, the other daerah is Kinta, Rarut Matang, dan juga Hilir Perak. Yeah? The rest is comparatively young. And if you look at this in terms of the sub-district level, you can see the black area. The black area is where the aged population are. in Perak distribution. So when local councils and things, and ADUN especially, they have to look at what are the services available at these places for the orang tua. Because orang tua are the one who votes. Yeah? Orang muda doesn't vote much. Yeah? So these are the issues that they have to think about in terms of what is available in Perak for the needs of the older person. Okay, what we need to do then? We need to look at the proper assessment of the situation of aged in the country and the expected changes in incoming cohorts, strengthening and improving current provision of health, finance, family, housing, environment, etc., building the capacity of key actors, public, private, and civil society to care for the older person, and introducing innovation to transform our approach to a multi-sectorial issues, and we should recognize the opportunities that comes with aging population in a rapidly modernizing, prospering society. And there are several initiatives all over the world that's been looking at how to promote innovation for aging society. And one of our colleagues is Professor Iwazaki, who was saying about giving 6 solutions to developing a smarter aging-friendly society where the approach is inclusive and you have innovation for application and new technology, employment, transformation of aging society, and the support for SDG-related aging society. And we are now looking at older person as producers and also as consumer of services. Okay? And my last slide is this slide, where we did a national survey on the population of the older person in Malaysia, and only less than 5% of the older person are poor and disabled. 8.5% of them are poor, but they are not disabled, they are able. And the other percent is they are non-poor and non-disabled. And the other percent is non-poor and able. And 61% of them are non-poor and able, meaning that we need to think of services that should be suitable for these people. For example, if only less than 5% of the aged population needs welfare, why should we focus majority of our resources to those who need welfare? Because you have to think of other aged population that also needs different kind of services. For example, for those who are non-poor, but they are disabled, you need to develop affordable services. And for those who are poor and able, you need to think about income generating programs. And the last one, they are the potential to contribute to society. So when you look at older person, you don't look at them as a burden, because the burden one is only less than 5% of the whole total population. So you have to change your mindset in looking at the older person themselves in total. So this is this basic brief scenario of the situation of aging in Malaysia, and we need to look at how do we prepare individually, how do we prepare families, and how do we prepare society to look at the future aged. Because the future aged are all of us. We are educated, we have resources, not the past aged. Because the past aged who are aged now, they had disadvantaged lifestyle. They had less education and so on, and maybe they're more lack of resources and things like that. So we have here in our panel, now Anoisham's here, we have 3 male panelists. I'm the only female one. So I would like to introduce, and maybe all 3 of you come up to the hall, to the stage. and we will have an interesting session. But all three of my colleagues here are all from the financial background. Yeah? They are from the PRS, they're from EPF, and they're from the Bank Islam. Okay? And their profiles are in the program book. Okay? So we go ahead. I'll go there. And okay, maybe you want to sit or do you want to stand? Let me introduce first our first speaker, Encik Hussein, who's the CEO of PRS, is in here, and he'll be talking why Encik Hussein of PRS is here, because we thought he will be talking about how we as a population need to prepare financially to be handling our old age. So I'll let you have the floor, Hussein.
Do you have my slide? Hello, yeah. Assalamualaikum and selamat petang. Okay, yeah, you got my slides. Yeah. So I'm the CEO of Private Pension Administrator Malaysia. We are the central administrator of private retirement scheme. So let me allow me to take a few minutes to explain what private retirement scheme is all about. Yeah? So this is the content of what I'm going to talk about. Okay. PRS, Private Retirement Scheme, is a voluntary long-term savings and investment scheme designed to help Malaysians save more for their retirement. PRS was launched on 18th July 2012 by the Yang Amat Berhormat Prime Minister. And the introduction of PRS is in line with the World Bank pension frameworks, which recommends that multi-pillars to ensure retirees do not rely solely on social welfare system. I know it means quite technical. My colleagues from APF is smiling. What it means is that we supplement whatever savings you have either through the mandatory savings scheme through EPF or for the government through the pension scheme, or if you have unit trust or amanah saham, tabung haji and whatnot. Yeah? So this is a government agenda to help Malaysia achieve or moving towards high income nations, you know, where multi-pillar, which I will go into what we mean by multi-pillar, is needed as recommended for the high income nations that we aspire to be. Yeah? All right, this is what it looks like in terms of our social security network. Pillar 0, probably you heard of example like BR1M, BRIM. And then mandatory for Pillar 1, we don't have it for Malaysia, quite common in European countries. Mandatory 2, Pillar 2 is the EPF and the government pension plans through QUAP. PRS is the voluntary, which is Pillar 3. Yeah? So we make up the suggested framework for Malaysia. Yeah? So being voluntary, PRS is intended, as I mentioned, to supplement the mandatory schemes as well as long-term alternative to whatever saving schemes that you already have out there. Okay? And when we talk about retirement, we have to also consider what are the retirement concerns. Yeah? Basically, when you plan for retirement, these are typically 3 major concerns that you need to think about. One, how much income do you need, yeah, so that you can retire comfortably? This is basically it's very hard to say, it's a very difficult question to answer because we don't have a set data to say, okay, you need 10,000 a month, why not? So what we say is that as a general guide, one should aim to have a steady income of about 2/3 of your last drawn salary. So if your retiring at the age of 60, and if you're drawing 10,000, for example, so aim to have about 7,000 to sustain, because the other 1/3 could be the expenses that you incur now for tax, for going to work and whatnot. So when you start working, those expenses are no longer required, so you are left with 2/3 of that to carry you, to support you through your golden years. Yeah? So how do you achieve 2/3? So we say you set aside 1/3 now. While you're working, you set aside 1/3. And while 1/3 sounds a lot, but 23% already gone through the mandatory schemes. So the gap of 10% is where we suggest that you set aside additional savings in other kind of saving schemes, or to PRS. Here is what we're saying. Yeah? So altogether, 23%, this plus 10%, this make up 1/3 of what you should set aside now in order to achieve the income of 2/3 when you retire later on. So concern number 2, how long? Yeah, how long you need the savings for? Yeah, Professor Aizan already mentioned about the life expectancy for Malaysians. So just to recap the latest one, Kaum Hawa actually lives longer by more than 4.5 years. Okay, so about 77.4 compared to 72.7 for men folks. Yeah? So based on that, as a general guide, it is recommended that you save at least you should plan for 20 years. So from the time that you retire at age 60, plan for that you will live up to 80. But I'm sure some famous Malaysians who are already, still active in the 80s and the 90s. Yeah, so save for at least 20 years, but plan, if you can, more is always better, because you may be living beyond the 80s or the 90s. Yeah. Okay, the third concern is about how strong are your savings in the face of inflation. Basically, so not only that your savings should last for 20 years at least, they should also allow you to maintain your lifestyles even with increasing cost of livings. So basically, what costs maybe what you need 8,000 for the first year, perhaps it will cost more 5 years down the road after that. Yeah? So to recap, the concerns that people tend to have is how much, how long, and how strong, yeah, to face the increasing cost of living. So just another view is basically for someone who start working with 3,000 ringgit at the age of 25, and he works until 60, and assuming that he doesn't get promoted, he doesn't change his job, so his salary will grow at about 3% a year. So he will reach retirement age of 60, earning 12,000. And with the 2/3 of that, that's about 8,000. And as you can see, I think there's no pointer here. Yeah, so you can see that 8,000 when he's at age 80, that is actually higher when he's at 8,000 at the age of 60 will go to perhaps 15,000 by the time he reaches 80 years old. This is with the assumption that the inflation is about 2.5% and return on investment is just a modest 4%. Yeah? Okay, private retirement scheme, as I mentioned, was launched by the government to help Malaysians save more for retirement, and compared to other type of savings, PRS has inbuilt discipline where, just like EPF, you cannot touch your savings, or the account A or account 1 of your savings 70% until the age of 55, and you can withdraw some amounts, but largely it's meant for you to save. You have a separate jar for retirement, yeah, which you should not touch. You can have other jar or other savings for your children's educations or for your dream vacations and so on. But the money that you save now for your retirement, you don't touch until you reach your age of 55 or 60. This is meant for you, and you shouldn't plan to use your retirement savings for your children. Yeah? They should plan, they should have their own, their own life. You've given them good education and everything, have a good job. Let them save for their own, I don't know, weddings, vacation or whatnot, even their own car. I know parents tend to help buy cars, housing and so on. I think at our age, we look after our children as well as our parents. So it's quite, taxing financially for our generation. But what I'm saying here, you need to be selfish, set aside retirement only for you. But if you have other means, save in a different job for vacation, for your children's education, wedding, whatnot, yeah? So in other words, you work hard, so you should enjoy your own fruit of labor, yeah? So in another way to recap, basically we say how we can help you save for your retirement in a smart way, yeah? S stand for what I've touched before, sufficiency as well as sustainability. What it means is how long and how strong. And then A, adequacy is how much. M before that is you save and set aside and grow according to the compound growth in the schemes that you choose, in the funds that you choose, and do it regularly. Just like you save for the mandatory, every month you set aside 23%, you set aside 11, your employer set aside 23, set additional savings on a monthly basis as well. So this can complement each other. And then PPA being the central administrator, we are also advocating the use of technology via smartphone where you can top up your retirement funds as well as choose different funds, switch funds or transfer providers and so on via the comfort, the convenience of a smartphone. So that's what SMART stands for, yeah? That's what we're trying to advocate, yeah, when we go and do talks to places around Malaysia. All right, the key components of private retirement scheme, the regulator is Securities Commission, who is also the regulator of the capital market. Yep. And there are 4 key players. PPA is the central administrator, and we have the fund managers, the providers. The fund or the contribution that you save every month are managed by or invested by PRS providers but are kept in trust by scheme trustees. Yeah? The consultants, the distributors are those who you meet to understand where to save and get advice on financial planning and so on. Yeah? Okay, PPA, where I'm the CEO, we are established by the Securities Commission in October 2012. Therefore, we come under direct supervision of the SC. Our major role is we help the public on retirement educations. What I'm doing here in front of you is that, meaning I educate you on how to plan for how to consider and address the concerns of retirements into your golden years. And we also provide ongoing services to all PRS members who can open PRS accounts with any of the 8 providers. Yeah? Okay, these are the PRS providers, the fund managers. Yeah? 5 are bank-backed, 2 are insurance groups, and 1 is from the investment banking group. Yeah? I'm sure you are familiar with the names. And as with any voluntary initiative, incentives are required to, basically in this case, 3 incentives are offered by the government to help shape the saving behaviors. Yeah? One of them is the up to 3,000 ringgit of tax relief annually on individual contributions. And on employer contributions on top of the mandatory 12%, there's an additional 7% tax relief on employer contributions. And unique to PRS, we have this PRS youth incentive For young working adults between the age of 20 to 30, so if you save in PRS for 1,000 ringgit, you get a one-off incentive by the government worth 1,000 ringgit as well. This is available until end of next year. This is basically to inculcate good saving behavior among young working adults. So when you start, or rather when they start working, start their career, they should already start save extra for their retirement. Yeah? So last, I have a few more slides, but I'll just stop here. This is just to show that in the almost 5 years that we have been in existence, we have about 261,000 members. 27% of them are among the youth below 30 years of age. And the youth incentive that I mentioned earlier, 70,000 of youth have already benefited from this incentive since it was inaugurated in 2014. Yeah? So at the moment, our asset AUM is growing at and reaching 1.85 billion, which is still small, but we are also still very young. Yeah? I think that's all for now. Thank you very much.
We now call
Okay, Assalamualaikum and very good afternoon. Thank you for having Bank Islam in this prestigious dialogue. And I'm so happy to be around with the esteemed guest panelists. Some of them are very familiar to me, especially Hisham. All right. Okay, I think Professor and CEO of PRS have explained at length in terms of the aging population and its implications, but are probably looking at a different angle. I mean, as a financial economist, like it or not, I'll be looking from the macro point of view. Okay, basically, when we look at these charts, what it tells you is that we tend to live longer, and obviously, I think Professor did mention about the need to have sufficient funds when we retire. And you can see that it's quite consistent across income level, in terms of countries by income level. The high income, the middle income, the low income, they tend to have a higher life expectancy at birth as they progress in the more recent period. Looking at, I'll tweak slightly in terms of, let's assume that the retirement age at 60, so we can have some ideas what's the duration like when we retire. So I think more or less the ballpark figure as highlighted by the previous speaker is about 20 years. It's pretty much in line with what is being experiencing by the high income. So we are talking about 20 years retirement period whereby we need to have a decent wealth to be accumulated over the years while we are working. The question then is whether we have enough funds when we retire. And looking at the inflation rates, well, pretty much stable, but this is arguable. But when we look at the index level, the consumer price index, the level itself, what we can say is that the cost of living continues to rise. It is, I would say, quite consistent across countries. So this also poses great challenges in terms of how a person can actually accumulate their funds when they retire, or even do their savings during their working period. It's a great challenge. And looking at the investment returns, i.e. the government bond yields, the 10-year yield across countries like in the US, the UK, Germany, Japan, it shows that the rates of returns in the kind of a risk-free assets continue to decline over the years. So it shows that even though we have this, perhaps we have this good behavior, i.e. savings behavior along the way, but the challenge also is on the return itself. The risk-free is on the declining trend. So in order for us to have sufficient funds during retirement, perhaps we need to have a slightly higher risk appetite then. I don't know whether this is an optimal solution, but the idea of taking an additional risk is perhaps quite disturbing. So I think this is also another area of concern in terms of why we may have some challenges in terms of having enough funds during retirement. And not to mention also in terms of economic growth, as we become more developed countries, we tend to have a smaller growth along the way. I think the implication also kind of in tandem with what is happening in terms of the interest rate level. So I think that's the reason why I think the developed economies is having a hard time to what they call to normalize their interest rate because of the GDP growth continue to remain quite low. In fact, it's been low for quite some time. So again, issues on the rates of returns or the interest rate, which is supposed to be one of the main income drivers for our retirement, is also being compromised, so to speak. And if you look at the household debt situations, it's pretty much on the high side. This is household debt as a percentage of net disposable income in the OECD countries, which is developed countries now. So what it tells you is that generally households prefer to consume more today. So this again poses a great challenge in terms of how on earth these people are going to have enough fund during the time, because they prefer to consume or enjoy their fruits of income today. So even in Malaysia also we have kind of a similar situation, but at least we saw a slight decline in terms of household debt as a percentage of GDP to about 85.6%. But still, in a nutshell, generally speaking, because of higher debts, high indebtedness level, it shows that households, generally speaking, prefer to consume more today as compared to consume in the second period, i.e. during retirement. So, what we can do, from financial economist's point of view, I like to think that obviously we need to grow more. I think the notions of as we go develop, as we become more developed, perhaps it's quite acceptable to have a low or single digit economic growth. It's kind of a stigma that we need to remove, you know. I think we can grow more. And that's why I think the pension funds has been talking about, they has been investing based on SRI, ESG screening, because they believe the returns is much better if the investee companies are adopting this ESG concept. So in the case of Islamic banking institutions, I think in 20th of July, Bank Negara, they have issued a strategy paper on value-based intermediations. What it means is that it's a form of intermediation that will take care of three key things, which is the profits, the people, and also the planet. Kind of ESG connotations. So for us at Bank Islam, we try to embrace this concept. It's quite a new concept for us, but it kind of jives with our strategy to move away from consumer sector to go into more deeper in terms of SME financing. So I think if we can do bigger, we go big in terms of VBI intermediation among the Islamic banking institution, I think perhaps you can actually achieve a sustainable growth going forward. And the second component that we believe is actually the role of philanthropy economies, which is the Wakaf Fund. I think last week, 6 Islamic banks have signed up to develop Wakaf funds with the religious council for every state. So, in fact, in Bank Islam, we actually participated in the past. I think in Taman Wakaf Siti Aisyah in Penang, whereby we finance the end financing to develop a residential property over there, whereby the house prices offered to the residents over there is actually 30% cheaper from the market price. And in, I think in 2015 or 2016, if I'm not mistaken, it's actually, we provide a bridging finance to develop a wakaf land, again to develop a residential property in Klang and Shah Alam. And then again, house prices offered for that particular area is actually about 10 to 20% cheaper from the market price. So going forward, what we have in mind at Bank Islam is that we can actually use this wakaf fund to try to intervene the housing market by way of, we purchase using the wakaf fund all these houses within the residential areas. And what happened then, we will try to lease or rent it out to the market at a below market price. So what we are trying to do is that with this wakaf fund, we try to promote a rental markets in the housing markets. So it perhaps kind of try to intervene, and perhaps we actually try to stabilize the house prices from, continue to rise exponentially. So again, I think these are, I would say, not all in terms of a solution. Perhaps one of the solutions that we can think of by way of having a better or higher GDP growth, they will more, which is more inclusive, and perhaps along the way it will translate more, perhaps higher interest rate level that can give more better returns for our retirement funds. Yeah, that's about it. Thank you.
I now call our last speaker, Dr. Encik Noor Hisham, for his presentation. So we have more time for question and answer for our panelists.
Okay, Assalamualaikum, good afternoon. First, I'd like to apologize for arriving late. I was at another event in KL this morning. Pretty much talking about roughly the same issues. So what I really want to do is address, rather than at an individual level, we talk about it on a social level, what kind of challenges that Malaysia is facing in terms of the provision of retirement. We think only a handful can actually afford to retire, and I'll run through the numbers. We have a working population of working age of roughly 22 million people. This is what it breaks down to. 34 are outside the labor force. And what that means is that they are not covered under either EPF or QAP or PRS or LTAT or any of the other saving funds. That's 1/3. So that's roughly about 6-7 million people. Another 28, no formal social protection programs. This is the informal sector. The hawkers, the fishermen, the self-employed, they don't fall under EPF or QAP either, right? So that's already more than half. 7 in 100 are under the government pension scheme. However, only 2 in 7 can probably afford to retire comfortably. So roughly about 2/3, even within government, even though they are provided a pension, and it's a very good pension benefit system. You get 2/3 of your income, you get healthcare, you got survivorship benefits. It's very, very good. But the problem is that the salary levels are so low that even with 2/3 of your income, you can't really afford to retire. Okay. Undercovered, we have 31% under EPF, roughly. But there's a bit of a problem here, and I'll show you some of the numbers. Only 18 achieve the basic saving requirement. What we mean by the basic saving requirement is that you have enough saved for 20 years in poverty. Okay? The poverty line is roughly around 1,000 ringgit, or 900 something ringgit. You only have enough for 20 years. The reality is that most EPF members basically blow through the entire EPF savings within about 3 years. Right? So they have another 17 years to go, and that doesn't even take into account the probability of life expectancy be actually increasing. Okay. 1 in 13 within the EPF have a salary over 10,000 ringgit. I'll show you the exact distribution later, but 10,000 ringgit is what we think you basically need over time to actually have enough in retirement. So the bottom line is that only about 3% of Malaysians have enough set aside to retire on. And that's the social problem we're facing today. It's not something in the future. This is today. It's going to get worse. And it really needs a holistic, I think, revision of the entire system for us to achieve the kind of society that we actually want. So there's a lot of things going on. Well, I think we've covered some of these things. The previous speakers have covered some of these things. But what we're seeing is a gradual movement, I think focusing on the last one especially, we're seeing a gradual movement away from the formal employment sector and more into the informal sector. There's what they call the gig economy. Well, there's roughly 1.6 million civil servants, but 200,000 of those are actually under contract where they're not entitled to pension benefits. A lot of the people who are in the formal sector as well increasingly fall under contract terms of service where they don't have to pay EPF. So they don't have anything set aside either. And it all goes back to the individual. So there's a big issue here in terms of how the pension system in Malaysia actually works. Because increasingly the way the labor market is actually evolving, these systems don't cater for those people, right? It's a large uncovered population, and those even within the covered part of the population are facing those kinds of challenges. Right? This is what we're looking at in terms of growth and the impact on our fiscal expenses. You can see the difference in the age distribution. Right now the bulge is roughly between the age of 21 to 25. Okay? They're the biggest portion of the population. But within about 30 or 40 years, that's going to basically disappear. This is really, I think that's one of the biggest challenges that I think a lot of us within the social protection area actually face, is persuading the young that they need to save, that they need to plan. Because, 30 years from now, you are going to be the age and you're going to be facing these kinds of challenges. And going back to what Nizam was showing just now in terms of the returns, what's going to happen with an aging population? There's a couple of things that's going on. One is from our own EPF data as well as data from other countries, we know that income generally flattens out after the age of 40. It doesn't continue rising. For the majority of the population, they max out their income levels at roughly around the age of 40 to 45. Right? And it starts declining after that. So the larger the population, the less ability for them to actually generate income. The second part of it is that as the population ages, the level of savings, the quantum of savings actually rises. And that poses a problem for not just EPF, but a lot of other funds around the world. Because the more savings you have, and they're all chasing the same assets, whether it's government bonds, whether it's equity, whether it's property or private equity or infrastructure, that increases the price and reduces the return. So there's two problems. It's an intertwined problem that we're facing here. One is that the number of people that we have to cater for is increasing over time, and the ratio is increasing over time. But the flip side of it is that the same changes in demography is actually reducing returns that we need to provide for these people. So you're hit on both sides. The bottom line is that a lot of it will end up being paid for by the government. And again, the changes in the labor force actually mitigate the ability of the government to do that, because the ability of the government to tax will slowly decline. Just to give an example, you've heard of Uber, right? Uber is a global company. When you use an Uber taxi in Malaysia and you use a credit card or debit card, the transaction goes through the Netherlands. And it's taxed at Netherlands tax rates rather than Malaysian tax rates. We don't get any benefit from the economic activity that Uber does in Malaysia. Okay? And that's something that's increasingly happening across a lot of these internet-based services. So it all goes back to where we need to cater for more people. We're going to see reducing return, but we're also going to see larger public expenditure. And this is an unsustainable trend that we're looking at. Okay? And just to give you an idea of what, again, the situation in Malaysia is right now. Salaries are rising as a proportion to GDP. So that means the income level should increase. However, the latest number is we're at roughly around 35%. In most developed economies, it's around 60%. Singapore, for example, is around 44%, and it's the lowest in the developed world. Korea, I think, is 46%. The UK is around 50%. But if you look at Japan, if you look at the United States, they're all 60% and above. So relative to GDP, workers in Malaysia are actually underpaid. Second thing is what they do with that income. If you see the chart on the right there, this is from the national accounts issued by DOS. The marginal savings rate, what we save out of our income for households, is less than 2%. It's actually about 1.6%. Just 1.6%. We're trying to get 1/3. We're only hitting 1.6%. Okay? You take away the mandatory contributions to PRS and EPF and LTAT and everything, it's -7%. So households are actually spending more than they're saving, which is why you see the household debt numbers actually rising. We're not saving at all, essentially. What savings we have is within the pension system itself. But again, going back to that first graph I showed you, roughly about 40% of the population, of the working population, has any pension coverage at all. The other 60% does not. Right? And this is what the income levels look like from EPF's perspective. This is from our database. This is on the left is the bottom 10%, and on the far right is how much income you need to exceed the 90th percentile. The 90th, if you hit above 5,800 ringgit per month, you are in the top 10% of income earners in Malaysia. That's how low our incomes are. The bottom 10% is actually 600 ringgit. It's below the minimum wage. And the problem from EPF's perspective, you look at the number of contributions the bottom 30% actually make once a year. Not even 12 times. Once a year of 600 ringgit, you're talking about maybe 100 ringgit. It's 10 ringgit a month. Right? So even within the EPF system, you're talking about maybe 70%, or roughly around 4 million people actually have any substantial savings at all. Right? And most of them are inadequate. The bottom 30%, almost none at all, despite the fact that they are contributors. So we have a huge social problem that we need to address here. Again, we're talking about a larger proportion of the population will be aged in the near future. They do not have sufficient savings. Some of them have zero savings at all. Right? Returns on what savings we have is likely to decline. Our long-term forecast is that Malaysia's GDP growth will drop to 3% within the next 20 years. So the ability to actually save out of that is going to be jeopardized. So there's a real issue that we need to face up. And as far as solutions is concerned, they sound nice in theory. But the practical aspect of it is that unless there is a collective decision that we should sacrifice for the betterment of all society, I don't think we'll make any resolution to this problem at all. And that implies some form of social pension. It could imply negative income tax. It could imply universal basic income. All these potential solutions we're discussing within the government. The flip side of that, of course, is that any provision of this kind will require higher levels of taxation, which is going to be very unpopular. I know that there is a lot of skepticism about what the government does with its money, but I think if we target taxation, or what I like to use the term earmark taxation for pensions, for healthcare, for social benefits, then I think the level of acceptance would be a much higher. So I think I'll leave this at that, and I guess we'll go to question and answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay Sham. I now open the floor for discussion. If there are any questions and answers to ask from the panelists, you're welcome. But before you ask the question, please identify who you are and which organization you are from, for the sake of the note takers. Thank you. Any questions from the floor? Yes, sir. We may take two questions or three questions before the panelists respond. Yeah?
Assalamualaikum. My name is Ahmad from University Utara. Two questions. I think the scenario that you guys are presenting is very bleak. Seems like Malaysia is not at a stage where we are supposed to be if we aim to become a high-income nation by the year 2020. So my concern is, like your presentation earlier, Prof, you said 60% of our aging population is still able to contribute. But the problem is our retirement age is 60. Compared to other countries around ASEAN, like Indonesia, which is 65. Thailand is also 65. I'm not sure about others, but the developed nation, normally the age of retirement is 70. So I'm not sure whether increasing the age of retirement is a viable solution, because it increases the burden of our government, especially in terms of our financial. And secondly, when the aging population is increasing, if we were to look at the structural design of our nursing home, I think the design is not really receptive to the demand of the current population. You know, if we were to go back again to the presentation by the previous speaker, the mayor of Oklahoma City, you know, they have designed a nursing home in such a way that the design is very much receptive to the needs and interests of the population. But the design of our nursing home is old, is outdated. You know, as if the design is not even suitable for all the people to go and stay until, not to say they die, but it is not at all convenient. And that's the first one. The second question is, you know, the other three panelists are also presenting to us that our income is not at par with the current pace that we are going, especially in terms of the cost of living, which is increasing every single day. So what would be the ideal solution? If the problem is very clear, but the solution is not there, I'm afraid that we are not going to become a nation that we aspire to be. Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. I have another one before the panel speaks. Anyone? No questions? Okay, maybe then I would like to throw the questions about, can you all answer about design, or I will answer that? Maybe you all answer, what is the ideal solution for Malaysia? Go ahead.
I was going to say, Prof, when we talk about design,
Yes.
it's not just the nursing homes.
It's not.
It's everything. It's the transportation, it's the buildings, One of the things we're doing, EPF is actually moving to a new headquarters in 2020, and one of the things we're trying to do is make sure that it's disabled and aged friendly. Because right now, our current HQ is designed in the 1980s, and it is totally unfriendly to anybody who has any kind of a disability. I'm helping people up the stairs, you know. So I remember we went to see the Singapore government about how they tried to manage everything. They did everything. And it's not just about design of nursing home. They actually had a team go down to the MRT and figure out the signage for the bathrooms, right? Because it was not friendly to the aged. So it's more than just the design of the nursing homes. Just to address your other questions, the retirement age, when we ask people about raising the age, well, not so much age of retirement, age of withdrawal, everybody said no. I think it was 99%. So there's a lot of, I think, pushback on the idea. Personally, I totally agree. We should actually peg the retirement age to life expectancy, like 15 years. So if at 77, you should be 62, right? The other problem that we have is that so far, and I saw this stunning graph by this Japanese professor that we actually have for our retirement, for our research chair. So far, life expectancy is not stopping. It's rising at a constant rate, right? It's rising 1 year every 4 years. So so far, it's not stopping. So, you know, you can change the retirement age at any given level, but, you know, sooner or later, you're going to have to raise it again. The other thing that we found very intriguing when we visited Singapore, they have what's called the Re-Employment Act. So you retire at 62, and they actually force the companies to re-employ these workers for an extra 5 years. But the terms of the contract change. So the income level might be lower, the responsibilities might be lower, but you are continue to be part of the workforce and you continue to save. So I think that's something that we can explore. As far as wages is concerned, that one's difficult. I think partly it's partly also demographic. Because we are a young country, wages are low because the youth earn lower wages in the first place. So at some stage, it's going to rise to relatively developed country levels, but not to the kind of levels that we see in the more advanced economies. I suspect we'll hit about 40 to 45%, and it will stop there. So it needs something else to push it above that. But that's a complicated question, so I don't think I can answer it right now.
Doc, any inputs?
Okay, I just want to respond on the question with regards to cost of living and how our income is not really up to the mark, you know. I think in one of the slides presented by our third speaker, Mr. Hisham, he did mention about public expenditure would actually will rise at some point because of the as we become more aged. So I think that's the reason why I put my last point, the role of philanthropy economy, especially on the Wakaf fund. Because I see we need some mechanism that can complement the fiscal policies. I mean, to expect fiscal policy, to expect the government to continue to subsidize everything, I think it doesn't make sense and it's not sustainable. And I think if you look at the income gap, it's also widening. And then there's also people who are doing well in this economy. Just take, for instance, last year when Department of Statistics came out with a study on domestic tourism. You know how much Malaysians spend on domestic tourism? It's about 74 billion ringgit. That's about 6% of GDP. So it shows that the economy, there are certain people who are doing well. It's just that a matter of how we are going to redistribute those income. I mean, using taxes, yes, but it only can do to a certain extent because people tend to evade or to avoid those taxes. So we may need to inculcate this or harnessing the act of charity. I think that could help to a large extent on how we can reduce the cost of living.
All right, yeah, I just want to add just to expand on what my colleague says about retiring or raising the retirement age. When PPA actually go out and do road shows, and we took some informal surveys, and quite a sizable of them say they all want to retire early. You know, like up to age 40, they all want to retire early and enjoy their life. And then I challenge them and say, if you retire at 40, you have another 40 years. What are you going to do? How are you going to fund your life? So basically, what we are telling them is, don't go and work to retire early, but find the job that you like to do. You know, I'm sure all of us love what we're doing here. So we don't want to retire. We want to continue working. We can be productive even in the 70s. I'm sure you have seen some of our famous Malaysians are still active in the 90s. You know, so the millennials now, they think about retiring early, but we should advise them to say that find the job that they like so that they don't have to think about retiring early. Yeah?
It's true. Let me also add in terms of how we should handle the design and all that. And like Hisham, it needs an overall thinking. It touches every level. Because to me, what's happening right now is we are very narrow in terms of our time frame of thinking. We need long-term thinking process because, and you know, politician is within what they can do within these years of in service. But I think for planners, it has to be long-term. And of course, it's going to be the issue that we all will be facing, and some of us are already facing with taking care of our parents, and also in-laws, and also if we have children, we still have to take care of them, because right now the issue is many of us are in the sandwich generation that needs to do both responsibilities, but we are not taking care of our own self because of that. Yeah? So we need to really revamp our approach of looking at aging as self-responsibility, community responsibility, and so on. Because we need to look at no more aging as just filial responsibility. It is now filial society that we have to create so that all of us in this room and outside of this room will be responsible for all of our aging needs. Because that's how we change. Because when you have dementia, the community knows that this person is demented, and then when he goes to the shop, he doesn't pay the shop, but they know that this person lives here, we can get the money from the family. So these kind of issues and thinking process that we need to redo, and we start from ourselves. Prepare for our own aging, prepare for our own old age, because the children has their life to lead, and not let us be the burden of our own family. So thank you very much for all the speakers, and I think I would like to invite the panel, the audience, to give the usual round of applause for the excellent presentation. Thank you. So I give the floor to the organizer then.